Okay, so just to kind of ease us into this, we're going to create a method on the trait that we have used on the user model to check if a user has a particular role. So this is useful, of course, if you want to show a link to an admin panel, but we're going to be covering custom Blade directives a little bit later, so you can use them if you prefer. So let's just jump over to our user model, or rather the trait on the user model, and start to set this up. So the first method that we're going to include here is hasRole. Pretty straightforward, and we're going to be using variadic functions to allow us to pass potentially a list of roles in here, and we'll see how this works in a second. So let's just do a die dump on roles and we'll see what we get here. So I'm going to come over to roots and web. Everything I'm going to do is just going to be in here. It's a little bit simpler to do this rather than have to mess around with controllers. But let's go ahead and just pull in our request object. So illuminate HTTP request, and let's just name that request. And let's go ahead and grab the currently signed in user from that request. Of course, you can use the auth facade as well if you want to. I just prefer pulling this like this. So let's do a die dump on user just to see that we've got the right user in here. And of course, we need to go and register an account. So let's come over to register. Let's come over and just fill this in very quickly. And we are done. Okay, so coming back over to the home page here, we now have that signed in user, so we can go ahead and use that method on here. So let's go and say user hasRole, and let's just say for now admin. Let's give this a refresh in the browser, and we have an array with admin in. Now, the reason that we're using variadic functions and the splat operator is potentially what we might want to do is just comma separate and check if they have another role as well. So we might want to say, do they have any of these roles? So in this case, we could say, do they have a user role as well? Give that a refresh, and we see the following. So it's just a nicer way to pass this in. You don't need to do this. You can go ahead and omit this altogether if you really want to. But again, it's just an option. And this means that do they have any of these roles, not do they have both of the roles. So just bear that in mind. We're going to be doing something slightly different with the permissions. When we check using a variadic function, passing multiple items in, we're going to make sure that they have all of the roles. So again, you can just fiddle around with this, play around with it, and do whatever you want. Or in this case, just include one. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so let's focus on hasRole admin. So what we want to do is essentially iterate over all of the items in this array and check if they have that specific role. Now we know that on this trait, we have already set up our roles relationship. So in this case, what we could do is go ahead and create a for each loop on roles as role, and we can go ahead and just check if the roles that a user has contains that particular value. So in this case, to do this very simply, we can just say if this roles contains, we can give the key that we're after, and then we can give the role in there. So essentially what this will do is it will check inside of the relationship for the particular name value, and we know that we're calling their name inside of here, like so, and we're just checking if that name, in this case it's a name, is within there. Now if that's the case, we're just returning true. Like I said, this is checking any of the roles. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and return false. So that's really as simple as it is. So let's just set this up, and then we're going to go ahead and install the debug bar just to make sure that we're not executing more queries than we need. We want this to be pretty quick as well. That's really, really important. So let's create two roles. I'm going to create an admin role and just fill in the created and updated dates. Of course, you can get rid of them if you want to. Let's get rid of that. And let's create a kind of standard user role. Save this out, and we're going to go ahead and assign the user that we have here with the role of, say, admin or user. So again, as we saw in the introduction, users roles, because we have the foreign key constraint set up, I can very easily pick a user here and go ahead and say, well, I want them to be a user. Go ahead and save that, and we should, if we come over, give that a refresh, and we see false. So of course, because we have a user role, they don't have an admin role. Go ahead and select user, give that a refresh, and in this case we still get false. So I believe that is probably because if we just go back to the database and double check this, we've currently got a user, but of course, we would need to capitalize this. So if I just go ahead and refresh that now, we get true. So a couple of ways around this. You can either always stick to lowercase. I think that would be a lot better. So you could just go ahead and rename these. Or of course, what you could do is just go ahead and use string to lower or something like that. So you could go ahead and add that in there if you wanted to. I think in this case, the best way to get around this would be to just name them in the database like so. Although for display purposes, you might want to output these. So again, just choose what works best for you. We're doing this from scratch, so you have complete control over what you're doing. So we are a user. Now we can just go ahead and just check that this works for admin and user. So are they either one of these? Well, in this case, give that a refresh, they are. And again, you could implement this and change it up so you were making sure that they had both roles or any number of roles that you give. But in this case, I think this will do nicely for now, because usually what you will do is only check one item. In this case, has role admin. And we know that in this case, that should be false. Okay, so that's just a little taster of what we're doing. Later on, when we look at permissions, we're going to be looking at, do they have every permission? And you can use that in here if you wanted to implement some kind of check to say, do they have all of these roles? But again, like I said, it's pretty much going to be the case that you're only going to use this once like so. Okay, so before we go on, let's just very quickly set up Laravel debug bar. This is a package that will just pretty much monitor any queries you're executing. And I always use this with things like this. In fact, I use it in every project just to make sure that I'm not running too many queries or anything like that. We don't want to really slow down this application. So I'll leave a link to this in the course links, but let's go ahead and just pull this in very quickly, wait for this to finish, and we'll get this set up and we'll see the result of what we've just done. Okay, so that's finished. Let's go ahead and pull in the service provider for this. Of course, coming over to config and app, coming down to here and just popping that in there. Now, the way that this works is you can publish the configuration if you want to. If you are on a local machine and you're developing, your app environment is going to be local. As soon as you switch over to production, this package will stop outputting anything. So if you are deploying this, you can leave this pretty much as it is, and your environment configuration variables will obviously be different on your server. So if we just go over and refresh, this isn't going to work because I'm killing the page. So what I like to do is usually just do something like a var dump. So if we go ahead and say var dump here, wrap that in that, or use the dump function, and we'll see the following. So because Laravel uses Symfony's dump when you use DD, you can just use dump on its own if you want a little bit of a better output. Either way, we have false. We are pretty much just running one query here, and we can kind of prove that this isn't a problem by just duplicating it down a load of times and giving that a refresh. And you can see that regardless of how many times we use this, we're only executing 2 queries just here. This first one has nothing to do with what we've just been doing. So we're going to be running that along the way just to make sure that we don't mess up and get into any n+1 problems. But there we go. That is how we check roles. Fiddle around with it if you want, but we're going to move on to permissions, which is probably a little bit more useful. So let's go over and do that next.